leave room for experiments because it isn't like a fixed notion. Markets change, processes change, sales cycles change, messaging changes, and you always want to have a piece of the budget that's left for some experimentation. We're a creative organization at the end of the day. I want the team to feel emboldened to take some risks and try new things. I always try to leave some of my budget for that. Outside of generating new leads and new pipeline, there are other levers that can be pulled inside of the organization to deliver more revenue. How do you increase conversion rates on the sales side? How can marketing support that? How do you grow adoption of the product to drive better expansion inside of existing customer accounts? The solution to revenue growth isn't always just, get me more leads. There are other ways to drive efficiencies and growth opportunities inside of the organization that marketing can support. Exit.
All right, Ruth, thanks for coming on the podcast. Love the name Ruth, by the way. That was my grandmother's name. It's my daughter's middle name.
Nice.
We were gonna name her that, but we didn't. So it's nice to have a Ruth on the podcast.
It's a very grandmotherly name. I get told that all the time, that somebody's grandmother had the name Ruth, but
you know what? The second I heard that,
mother, so there you go.
I heard that coming out of my mouth, and I'm like, no, she's totally going to take this the wrong way. But
I'm flattered.
It's a great name. Bring back more Ruths. You know what? We're gonna get some messages from people that listen to this that also have the name Ruth. But
let's get that trending.
I call my daughter that all the time. It's very endearing to me. So, so you're the CMO at LivePerson. We're gonna talk about that. When I have a CMO on the podcast, like I said to you backstage before, we do these podcasts. We either like to kind of go deep on a topic, AI, SEO, ABM, or if I have a marketing leader, kind of do a conversation hearing about what it's actually like to run marketing, what your org looks like, what do you do, how do you set goals? So that's what I'm going to dive in on this episode with you. But first, before we do that, just give me quick backstory. You've been at LivePerson for a little over a year, but what's your marketing leadership journey? A little bit of your career story is helpful.
Well, I've been at this for a few decades now. This is my third turn as CMO at LivePerson. I've been there. It's actually going to be 2 years in about a month. But like a lot of CMOs, this wasn't a straight line journey. I actually had a decade-long career in the nonprofit world doing mostly fundraising and marketing. Fundraising, I always say, is basically sales. You're just selling goodwill instead of goods and services. So I did that for a while, especially while my kids were young. And then through happenstance, I got asked to start doing some freelance writing for a software company. And I caught the bug. I just loved the fast pace of the software world. I loved learning new stuff. I loved that I kind of had some autonomy to make my own decisions, unlike the nonprofit world where every decision was made by committee. And that engagement, really, I parlayed that into a full service agency. I launched a full service marketing agency. I left my nonprofit job, and most of my clients in that agency were in the software space. I did that also for about 8 years. And then one of my clients coaxed me in-house, a software company. And I really enjoyed that. Spent about 5 years there, moved up through the ranks into the role of CMO. I think I started with a director level title, and inside of 2 years or 3 years maybe was promoted into the CMO spot. Then I was headhunted out of that job into a smaller startup company called Ada, and joined as, that classic startup title, head of marketing. And that kind of evolved into a CMO role. And then LivePerson came knocking about 2.5 years ago and eventually convinced me to join. And that's where I've been ever since. So it wasn't a straight line and a few moves along the way. But that's kind of my 1-minute summary.
It's interesting. I talked to a lot of people who maybe were at an agency and then there's a client or something and seems to be a path where like you end up going to work for a client and that brings you in-house.
Yeah, I agency life was great. I learned a lot. It was very cool to build my own business and I was CEO there. And so I touched a lot of parts of that business. And, I was proud of what I had a partner. I was proud of what we did. We grew that agency. But it's really hard. It's really hard to have your mind spread across so many different brands as a marketer. And it just was taking a toll. And the idea of being in house and being singularly focused on one brand, one team, one process, one budget, that appealed to me at the time.
Yeah, that's like the agency story. Everybody kind of gets to that realization at some point. There's definitely, career long agency people. I do feel like that's the pitch. I don't have nearly a similar story, but I worked in an agency for 2 years. It was my first job right out of school.
Mm,
And even I felt like, man, I got 6 clients. It's hard to be really not, you can be knowledgeable about an industry, but it's hard to do this. I was doing PR,
yeah.
and I ended up going in-house for a software company called Constant Contact. And I remember just doing PR for one like product line inside of one company. Man, I felt like I'd been bench pressing with 3 plates on the bar, and I was able to take all the weights off and just like really focus. And that was a really fun feeling. You mentioned in passing, and I didn't plan on asking you this, but you mentioned something about like your kids were young, the timing and everything. Like, do you think you could take this role now, CMO of a public company with young kids? It's something I think about a lot, and there's obviously a lot to unpack there. And I also think me coming at this as a man and not somebody who actually has kids, like I have kids of my own, but I didn't give birth to them,
Mm.
is a completely different scenario. But it's a topic that I think a lot of people want to kind of hear from. So I'm just curious if we could kind of dive into that for a
Yeah,
second.
sure. It's a great question. So my answer is that I personally don't think I could. I don't think I could do this job that I do today if I reflect back, you know, 15 years. Could I, 20 years, because I have kids that are in their 20s, could I have done this job back then? And I don't think I could have. But that's not to say that another woman under similar circumstances might not have been able to. I made a choice. The nonprofit industry suited that choice. It was much slower paced, very flexible, no travel, pay wasn't as good, candidly. But it was a time in my life, given my circumstances, especially where I really did need to be much more focused on my children and available to them. I wanted to be. And the demands of my job today are such that I don't think I personally would have been able to do that and would not have felt good about it. And then I do think I posted about this on LinkedIn recently. I do think as a woman, when you give birth to children, and honestly, as a woman generally, there are certain physiological considerations that even inside of the most accommodating, understanding company do make it very difficult to devote yourself to the job at hand in the way that it requires, I think, to execute effectively.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, this is a little bit of a side note, but like my kids are 7 and 5, and my wife and I will often talk. Like recently, she's like, "Man, I'm just starting to feel like myself again."
Yeah.
And you get however you get like 3 months off or something insane, and then you're supposed to go back to work, and like you might not be feeling great. You're who knows what's going on in your mind. Like there's just so much happen. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, you're probably not sleeping, you are likely breastfeeding,
Right.
you give up, you relinquish your body for often 2 or more years to this person that you've brought into the world.
It's
And
insane. And then you got to hop on a one-on-one with, John on your team who feels like he should be getting a raise. And you're like, I don't want to deal. Like, how am I going to deal with this right now? This is insane.
yeah, fair. So I don't want to create an impression that it's not possible.
Yeah.
But for me, it wasn't preferable. Let's put it that way. I don't think I could have done this job justice under those circumstances at that time in my life.
It kind of comes down to like, I guess, understanding what the role of a CMO at a public company, or how many employees are at LivePerson?
About 1,000.
Okay, so the CMO of 1,000-person company, I think if you throw out the emotions of like, is that fair? Is it not? Like, if you just separate that, and it's like, well, that just kind of is what that job is, what that job is. And I remember having a conversation with, my boss at the time of like, I had young kids, and I really wanted to not work as hard, and I wanted to be home a lot more, and I wanted to leave the office at 4 o'clock and pick up my kids. And my boss was like, look, please don't take this the wrong way, but like, it's going to be hard for you to be CMO here and coming into the office at 9:30 and leaving at 4. And that wasn't personal at all. It just was like the reality of it. And so I think everything comes in waves, but now you're at a point in your life where like, yes, this is the perfect time for you to take this job. And I just think we often talk about the tactics in marketing, but I think you have to be able to zoom out and like look at the 50,000-foot view of your career and say like, okay, what chunk of time am I in right now? Is this 5 years, 10 years? Like, doesn't mean no, never. Just like for right now, maybe I got to find a job that's more right for me during this time of my life, this season of.
Totally. Randy Zuckerberg, Mark Zuckerberg's sister, actually wrote a book called Pick Three. It's on my shelf there somewhere. And I'm actually referenced in the book. I knew her at a time, and we used to have regular phone calls because she was the head of marketing. The premise of the book is that there are, I think, 5 or 6 different priority areas in anyone's life. There's family, there's health, there's friends, there's work. I forget what all 5 or 6 of them are. But the premise of the book is that at any given time of your life, to really be effective in all areas, you need to pick 3. The idea that anyone can do everything to its full potential at any given time is a fallacy and sets us up, I think, for disappointment and failure. And you have to prioritize. You have to pick 3 or 2 or whatever makes sense for you, given your disposition and the time in your life. And so at this time in my life, my work is definitely a top priority. My children are too. My family is as well, but they're less demanding of my time and attention. So
I
yeah,
think even just
totally.
just having that framework, it's freeing to be like, oh yeah, I'm putting all this pressure on myself to be like an A in every area, and that's
That's
just
right.
not possible. And so like, let's just limit the decisions a little bit and
Exactly.
focus on 1 or 2.
Exactly.
Do you work out?
I do. So now that is also, ebbed and flowed at different times of my life. But for the last year or so, I've prioritized that. I walk a lot. I try to walk about 2 hours a day. And I'm fortunate that I work from home. So I get up early and I go for a walk for an hour. And then I try to go one other time, either during a break or at the end of the day. And then I do strength training and I go on the Peloton once a week, and I try to do once a week yoga. So I mix it up a bit. Nothing extreme, but it's important to me. I know you do as well.
Important in what way? I want to. It's a topic that doesn't get covered enough, and I just think it's so important, and I just want to hear you say why.
So it's time just for me. So that's probably the number one reason why it's important to me. I'm not doing it for anyone other than me. It's not because of my job or because of my family or my friends, even though there's a value to me from those experiences. This is just me. Nobody else is involved. And at this stage of my life, I think a lot about sustaining good health into this next phase of my life. I imagine in the next decade, hopefully I'll retire, and I want to be healthy through my retirement. And it's been important to me to establish a rhythm and a lifestyle that is conducive to that. So what physical activity can I integrate into my life that is really sustainable in the long term? Walking was the number one. Strength training is important to me to diminish the likelihood of injury. And so it's really important to me, just as I think about this next phase of my life and maintaining a good sense of health.
I think this is an area that I would like to see more leaders talk about and lead by example. And just like, I know a lot of people who've been really successful in business I don't know what the right word, I'm lacking the word, at the mercy or at the trade-off of their personal relationships, their physical health. And somebody who has run an amazing business, but just like looks like shit, look like completely,
Yeah.
and I don't even, I'm not even a character about like, it's not a personal slight to say that, just like, you can just tell they're not eating right. They're not sleeping right. They feel terrible. And I just think it's so important. You only have your body. You only have this is your job. Like the number one thing is like to take care of yourself and to, be in a good mood and be in good health. And I was a young marketing leader, first time marketing leader, and I had somebody on my team, and she was like amazing designer, like top talent on the team. And she had been at the job for like a year. And she told me that since working at the company, she hasn't, yoga was her thing, but she hadn't felt like she'd been able to get to a yoga class in a year because she was grinding so hard on work. And I was like, man, that's so backwards. And like, how do I enable this person to like facilitate that? She's like, I just feel like I can't leave work at 5 o'clock because someone is going to like judge me for leaving the office early. And I'm like, man, how do we create a culture where that's never the case anymore? Like, because you leaving work at 5 o'clock to go and take that yoga class and prioritize yourself is going to only make you a better person at home, a better employee at the company. And it's a topic that have become really passionate about now. And I want to see more leaders like prioritize, like showing their teams. Like, I think it's for your team to hear you say like, yeah, she's up early in the morning, she's walking 2 hours a day, and she's strength. I think that's a very underrated, important part of like leadership. And your team is going to mimic those things. And I think that it's contagious inside of the company.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it speaks to, sort of this broader notion of work-life balance. And if you go back to this pick three framework, perhaps exercise isn't at the top of everybody's list at all times, which I think is okay. I agree with you that prioritizing your health and your fitness is important and makes you more effective in other areas of your life. But so is making time for friends, making time for family, having hobbies, and as a leader, it's definitely important that you lead by example on that front and reinforce a message to your team that, like, you are a whole person. And sure, your job is an important part of your day, but you need to make space for the other things that are important.
All right, let's talk about marketing. We could
Right.
we could do Dave's therapy hour for for half the
Fair
day,
enough.
which is no. This is my doing. This is me. I led us this way. So, let's talk about the marketing org. So, LivePerson is 1,000-person company. What does the marketing org look like? Let's start there.
Sure. It's the usual suspects. So, product marketing, content, comms, design, revenue marketing or field marketing, growth marketing, which is demand and marketing ops. And then at LivePerson, and in fact, in all three of my turns as CMO, the SDR organization also reported into marketing. So those are sort of the sub functions.
Do you think that can work regardless, or do you think that because you've managed the SDR org before, it makes sense? There's usually a lot of back and forth on this. I've kind of seen the playbook of like, if the CMO has experience doing that before, it makes sense. But oftentimes it lives in sales. I don't know if you have a strong opinion on that in one way or the other.
I do have a strong opinion on it. Selfishly, I think overseeing that function makes me a better marketer. It gives me more skin in the game, deeper into the pipeline, makes me more accountable to what it is that I'm handing over to sales, and I think makes the entire marketing team more accountable. So I suppose if the marketing leader doesn't have experience doing that, yeah, it wouldn't make sense. But my argument would be that marketing leaders should aspire to learn about that function, and I believe it will make them better marketers if they embrace it and have a willingness to take it on.
All right, so you roughly laid out the team, the roles. Let's. I should have asked this part first, but how do you articulate the overall marketing strategy of the company? Like, we have an inside sales team, we have enterprise, we're product led, ABM. How do you articulate the go to market strategy that marketing is responsible for?
Marketing is responsible for a lot of things, but I bubble it up to two strategic imperatives. The first is that marketing is responsible for delivering and influencing qualified pipeline for sales to hit their revenue numbers. That's imperative number one. And all of our strategy is tied to that imperative. Or I should say, all of our activities are tied to that imperative. And then the second imperative is to grow brand awareness and reputation so that within the context of a sales cycle, prospects are more likely to do business with us. And I see that as kind of air cover to the pipeline strategy. From a go-to-market perspective, LivePerson is the world's leading enterprise vendor in digital customer conversation solutions. That's kind of how we position. So we do focus on enterprise. There's some vertical specific orientation, some geo specific orientation. And the segmentation of the go-to-market strategy is very tightly aligned to the sales strategy.
So this is a enterprise focus org.
Yep.
Great. This is great. I've recently talked to more of like bottoms up type of companies. So what are the best marketing channels, and what does it look like to drive qualified pipeline when selling to the enterprise?
The best performing channels are the ones that are optimized on three fronts. And when I look at channels, I'm talking about like, where is the pipeline originating? Like what channel is it coming through? There are inbound channels, digital channels, SDR could be a channel. And of course, partnerships, can also be treated from a channel perspective. I'm looking at three variables. One is the volume of leads coming through that channel. Two is the quality of those leads, and the quality would be measured by virtue of conversion to pipeline and then ultimately conversion to close one business. And then the last variable is cost. And the best channels are the ones that are optimized on all three fronts, although that's rare. But you're always looking at those levers. What can you pull to best optimize? So you might have, SEO has often been a high performing channel, fairly low cost once you sort of figure it out and optimize. Pretty high volume of leads that come through, and they convert at a pretty high rate to pipeline. But you might have high cost channel like events. Events are very high cost, or paid ads are very high cost. But if they're also driving a high volume of leads that are converting at a healthy rate, then that's an investment that I'm willing to make. So I'm sort of scrutinizing all channels on those three fronts. And at LivePerson, I would say we have a strong SDR outbound motion insofar as it drives a lot of qualified pipeline. But, these are not the hand raisers necessarily. So those tend to move a little bit more slowly through the funnel, and maybe with a slightly lower close rate. On the inbound front, events do really, really well for us as a measure of influence. We host a lot of events to influence renewal opportunity set to close in quarter, or existing pipeline set to close in quarter. And we find that those events, having FaceTime with those prospects is really effective. But from a strictly first touch, sourced pipeline perspective, strangely, email works very well for us at LivePerson. SEO works very well for us. And then we use our own product, which is a chatbot on our website. And while that's not necessarily a first touch, because the leads that come through the chatbot, originate from email or ads or other inbound channels. But when they go through the chatbot, we see a higher velocity. And we believe that's because it's sort of a mini product-led growth motion where prospects are kicking the tires.
Nice. This is really good. I got some notes and I want to just circle back on some of the things. So the first touch, inbound, what's working? Is it content? Like, is it, because there's this narrative today that like, lead generation is dead. You sell the enterprise, you should only focus on 100 X number of target accounts and don't do any lead generation. But you're talking, for you, lead generation is a big part of this enterprise business. So I'm just curious about the specific like channels and offers. Maybe if you just have an example or two about like what a good first touch type of lead generation playbook would be. Because theoretically, you could just go get an outbound list of the companies you want to sell to and just try to email them to death and try to get them to talk to you. But I bet you're talking about something different.
Well, in an enterprise sales cycle, those things, it's not a straight line. Those things are all connected. We do target priority accounts for sure. Like that goes on. And then we tailor ads and email and events to those accounts. We're trying to drive some brand awareness. But then by the time the leads come inbound, to me, it's all about qualification at the top of the funnel. So are we qualifying based on sort of firmographic information. Is it an account that is the right size? Is it a contact that's the right contact for our purposes? Is it in the right geo or the right industry where we're best suited? And really doing that scrutiny right out of the gate when the lead converts. And then also sort of scoring for behavior and using that as a measure of qualification. What are they downloading? Are they going through our website chatbot? Are they asking for a demo? And the leads that perform the best, the ones that really have great velocity, are the ones that we have correctly qualified as being suitable for our purposes from an ICP perspective, and also are indicating strong buying intent. So now that said, I dispute this idea that you want to separate inbound and outbound. It's not real in an enterprise sales cycle. You can have SDRs very effectively outbounding a particular account, and it's crickets for months. They get nothing. And then you hit up that account with an ad, and the contact that you put the ad in front of is like, oh yeah, I remember I got an email from somebody, and they click on the ad, and then it's counted as an inbound lead. But you can't discount the brand equity of having a strong outbound motion as well. So I really just believe so wholeheartedly that inbound and outbound in an enterprise sales cycle are inextricably linked.
I love that. Very good. That's how marketing should work, right?
Yeah. And then add to that the influence of a partner network.
Right.
Like, because you can have the same argument. Does this get attributed to the partner, or is it the SDR, or is it an inbound motion? The best opportunities are the ones that have been touched by all of those.
You must be all aligned at the management level, because it is this simple. It's challenging in that what I think I like to type notes in my Slack while we do this, but like you said, like I paraphrase, like enterprise, sales and marketing is not a straight line. And that's true. The challenge though is like, we marketers and sales team, we want credit. And so we want to get the straight line. And so you've obviously done this a bunch in your career. How do you set up the company to be successful? So like, yeah, we don't care if it's inbound, outbound, partner, event, whatever. We're all one team. We're all trying to measure this. Like, we just want to win deals together. How do you get everybody to be in the same direction? I've worked at one company where literally the sales team was fundamentally like pitted against marketing, because if it was marketing source, then it wasn't sales source, and we were misaligned. And my comp plan as a head of marketing was not aligned with the sales leader's comp plan. And so we would clash all the time over this.
Yeah.
If you're set up like that, what you're talking about, while it makes a ton of sense, it's never going to work. So what's going on? What goes on inside of the company strategically to be aligned around this?
Some of it is comp and just KPIs. And so my marketing team is not held accountable to leads or MQLs. They're held accountable to pipeline outcomes, and the SDRs are held accountable to pipeline outcomes, and even have skin in the game on closed won business. So I do think comp plan matters. I don't think marketers should be held accountable to leads. I think that takes them too far away from the sales process. Some of it is culture, though, and I do think that's top down. And I think that, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if as long as we're hitting our revenue targets and we can validate that the contacts associated with these opportunities are interacting with marketing assets or activities, then that's a check mark for marketing, no matter who sourced the deal. These turf wars over who sourced it are absurd. And they tend to be most contentious when you're not hitting your numbers. I think that the CEO sets sort of the tone here, and there's always going to be some tension between marketing and sales. Marketing is always going to say sales isn't appropriately nurturing and following up the opportunities that we're delivering. Sales is always going to say marketing isn't appropriately qualifying the opportunities that they're sending our way. I think that tension is necessary. It holds us both teams accountable. But the real challenge is in ensuring that the leadership on both teams is aligned to addressing that tension in a way that serves the business. That's what matters at the end of the day, is, are we addressing it in a way that serves the business? So we actually document what constitutes pipeline readiness, what constitutes a first touch, how do we attribute how do we measure influence? So cracking the nut on that front, and I don't proclaim to have solved it altogether, but I do think if you can represent influence and not just attribution, then you can make a different kind of claim from a marketing perspective.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because also, don't you feel like, and I want to come back to this later, but you mentioned your efforts to like build your brand and reputation, right? So in a world where sales might go outbound to somebody and book a meeting, marketing might not get credit, but what if somebody knows that LivePerson exists because you have built a great brand, then out, but it's not this perfect funnel. And so like, if you're getting this tit for tat credit game, well, no, I want credit because I helped build the company. Like I helped build the name of the company. The reason that this worked is because you're reaching out to them with our content. But if you're not set up to be measured on that, the whole thing breaks.
Yeah, I like to distinguish between sort of business as usual activities on the marketing front, which are more so about brand awareness, reputation, third party validation, content assets, and true pipeline creation activities. And I actually allocate my budget along those lines as well. I think about how I distribute my budget on both of those fronts because I do think they're just as important. Now, I will say that if your pipeline and revenue aren't growing in a healthy way and you're continuing to invest to the same measure on the brand and reputation front, you need to think about whether or not those investments are working because I see, the brand and reputation investments as air cover for your pipeline and revenue growth. And if you're not growing from a pipeline and revenue perspective, well, then you have to wonder whether or not you're really having impact on the other side of the ledger.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about that? Actually, just the mix of like I often see questions in our Exit 5 community about like how do I think about the budget and like, these brand slash I like the term reputation. Actually, I really like that because it's a longer term thing. You're not just gonna do a billboard and get a reputation.
Right.
But is it like a 70-30 split of budget and people? Is it 80? Do you have some type of a measure for it? Because I often see like, well, it's kind of like this, it's this weird thing where like you need to do these brand initiatives, but if you're so far behind and you're not even hitting your number for this quarter, you can't really justify those brand initiatives. But if you never take the time to do them, they're not going to pay off in a year or two when you need them. So how do you think about, I guess what the question that I'm trying to ask is like the balance of, you know, pipeline building this quarter and like things that will make your pipeline goals easier 6 months, 12 months, 2 years from now?
Yeah. I don't think there's a formula that holds true at all times. I think it's very dependent on the age and stage of your company. So, a Series A company, I would argue, should be spending more on pipe gen, like revenue and growth in those earliest stages matters a great deal. And you're not likely going to grow your brand and reputation in those early days in a way that's going to take over the market. And that's the other variable is the nature of the competitive landscape. If you're in a highly, highly competitive space, then bigger investments in brand and reputation probably matter. If you're trying to carve out new ground, then I think that can be a slower burn in some cases. So I think all of those things need to be taken into consideration. Currently, I probably split around 40-60 between I'm spending about 60% of my budget on pipe gen and 40% on brand and reputation. We are an established public company that's been around for 3 decades at LivePerson, but we're still pretty small and relative to the competition, not nearly as well known. So we want to continue making investments and showcasing our differentiated value in a market that is changing very fast and furious. But pipe gen and growth is top priority for us as well. So I've distributed a little bit more to that side of the business.
Any lessons or learnings to those out there navigating? How do you allocate budget? How do you think about those things strategically? It's an area where I've made a ton of mistakes, and more specifically, like not being able to think long term enough. And so, like, you're so focused on hitting the plan right now, not having enough things to test and learn and scale. And so, like, well, next year the plan grew 20%, but I don't know where I'm going to get that 20% from. Just
Right.
curious if you have any wisdom on that area of the business and the job.
So one thing I'll say, one lesson learned is that the investments that you make today in marketing, and again, this is based on an enterprise sales cycle, so I'm bringing that bias, but the investments that I make today on marketing front, especially when it comes to pipe growth, are going to impact revenue 6 to 9 to 12 months from now. So if the plan is going to grow, so you have to work very closely with finance, with sales, to set your targets 3, 4 quarters out if you want to build a marketing plan and allocate your budget in service of that plan today. And you need to use math there. So if my revenue target is $10 million greater, I need to understand how much pipe coverage am I going to need to hit that number? How many MQLs am I going to need to deliver in order to achieve that pipeline outcome? And then I look channel by channel, what channels are going to deliver the most MQLs at what cost, how do I want to distribute my investment? So when it comes to generating new pipeline, I guess my advice would be use math and know that your investments, it's a staggered impact. It's not a flip the switch proposition. It takes time for a lead to become an opportunity that's actually going to be won. So that would be one good takeaway. The other would be leave room for experiments, because it isn't like a fixed notion. Markets change, processes change, sales cycles change, messaging changes, and you always want to have a piece of the budget that's left for some experimentation. And we're a creative organization at the end of the day. I want the team to feel emboldened to take some risks and try new things and A/B test. So I always try to leave some of my budget for that. And outside of generating new leads and new pipeline, there are other levers that can be pulled inside of the organization to deliver more revenue. How do you increase conversion rates on the sales side? How can marketing support that? How do you grow adoption of the product to drive better expansion inside of existing customer accounts? So it's not just the solution to revenue growth isn't always just, get me more leads, give me more at bats. There are other ways to drive efficiencies and growth opportunities inside of the organization that marketing can support.
I wanted to circle back on a couple of things here. So you got this overall strategy. You're trying to drive pipeline. Also, this is what I'm gonna say. What you mentioned there is really important, and this is one of the many mistakes I've made. It's easy to get on this hamster wheel of like, net new, we need net new, we need net new, we need more pipeline, when it's like, well, actually, let's look at the whole funnel, and like this conversion rate in this segment is really low and we're not winning these deals. And so like looking at the budget, it's not always just going to be more ad spend, more events. There's so much like middle to bottom of the funnel stuff that I think you learn. It's like actually a huge investment in sales enablement might improve the conversion rate by 20% in a segment. I see you nodding along. Seems like something this is.
Yeah,
this is
absolutely.
yeah.
And especially if you can diagnose stage by stage conversion, you might find that at stage 3, 60% of your pipeline is falling out. Well, how do you plug that hole in particular? Is there a marketing asset or a motion that you could introduce at that stage that will drive better conversion?
You got the overall strategy. You're trying to drive net new. You're trying to do some things that help existing deals, renewals. Do you have any like routines and rhythms for marketing? Do you like to plan, like something that I think is hard is like you have the year-long plan, but then you got to operate like monthly and quarterly. Do you like campaign planning? Do you have themes? How do you like chop up the year into the rhythms to keep things exciting and interesting, but also a lot changes, and you need to be able to like, you can't just have the plan for the year and roll it out and see what happens. You're kind of always coming up with new campaigns and themes. So I'm curious to see how you run the marketing, rhythms quarterly, monthly.
Yeah, well, the good news is that we do all of that. We do, campaign planning around themes. We meet as a marketing leadership team every week, and every other week we review our progress against our quarterly targets, and those are pipeline targets. And we sort of hold the discussion in the areas that aren't green. And then on the other week, we're just reporting against, our operational activities and what's happening over the course of the next 2 weeks. As a marketing wide organization, we meet monthly to review our progress against those KPIs. campaigns have pipeline targets. They're tied to product launch at LivePerson. I actually love that rhythm where when you can tie your campaigns and your big events to product launch. I think that drives a certain rhythm of the business that's really, really healthy. Um, but what I will say is that, it's not always smooth. There are always, pivots and changes thematically. I mean, when Gen AI hit the scene, it was like pandemonium. How are we going to adjust our themes? What are we going to launch differently? What are we going to say differently? So it's not always altogether smooth, but there is a regular rhythm that I think holds us accountable to those targets that we set quarter over quarter. And we don't always, by the way, have a year-long view. I wouldn't say it's that clean. We sort of ballpark have a year-long view, but really it's quarter over quarter.
Take me into that marketing leadership meeting. What do you do in that meeting?
Well, we have a document that we maintain. Every leader that reports to me has to fill out every week what their top priorities are, if there are any problems that they want to discuss, and then if there are any asks of anyone else on the team, that gets filled in advance of the meeting. And then, like I said, every other week, we actually just go through that document, particularly the columns if there are problems or asks of other folks on the team. We just round robin it. And then on the other week, we address that document asynchronously, and we spend our time together talking about our progress against our quarterly KPIs. It's a half-hour meeting because I just try to get things done as quickly as possible. Although I will say, if anyone on my team is listening to this, just being honest, we often go over the half hour, but I set the meeting for a half hour and try my best to stay true to that time frame.
I love that. I think it's just very easy to default to an hour meeting, and then it just like,
Exactly.
like
Yeah.
we have a planning meeting actually right after this, and it's an hour, and it should have been 30 minutes. And if we go over, we go over. But I think an hour, like you get to 10 minutes of small talk and introductions, and all of a sudden it's like, no, let's be efficient here.
Yeah. It used to be an hour. And then I thought, well, let's see what happens if I, have it. And we've been pretty good. I would say if we go over, it's usually not for more than 5 or 10 minutes. So that's what the meeting looks like. And it's a little bit tactical, but it holds the team accountable to those KPIs, which, that's what I love most about marketing. I know you've interviewed a lot of marketing leaders. I always say marketing is part art, part science. And I have skills in both, but I am much more comfortable on the science side of marketing. And I just love this idea that you set targets, you track against those targets, you measure your progress, and you use the data to actually inform your decision making as a marketer. And so that's what we spend a lot of our time doing.
Okay, two questions that I'm gonna finish with. One of them is I want to come back to. I guess this is a hard question to answer in 2 minutes, but you're gonna have to do it anyway. How do you think about measuring brand? This has come up a bunch lately in the Exit 5 community. Your LinkedIn headline is like evidence-based marketing or something like that. So how do you apply evidence to the brand and reputation? Do you have a simple school of thought for measuring the LivePerson brand?
Yeah, I do use some measures, and I wish I could take credit for this logic. Somebody uh, far smarter than I am shared this with me, and I've used it ever since. I use branded keyword clicks as a leading indicator of brand awareness. The thinking being that if somebody is searching for your company by name, that means that they are aware of you and they know your name. And so I hold the brand team accountable to a growing measure of branded keyword clicks quarter over quarter, with an expectation that we're growing brand awareness quarter over quarter. We do survey brand awareness, both aided and unaided, to just see how we're doing again against the competition. We do that. I try to do that twice a year. And then we also look at things that like share of voice, social follows, a willingness of our customers and Forrester and Gartner to publicly share their good feelings about our company. Third-party validation is a measure of reputation and brand awareness. I know that's a little bit, outcomes-based, like tactical. But those are the measures that I use on the brand awareness front.
I love that. I love when things are simple. So branded keyword clicks would be, is this organic or does this include paid also?
It's anytime somebody is searching LivePerson along with any other term or LivePerson on its own.
Yeah.
So I think
Oh, by the way, I just would like to say I'm sorry for asking all these questions. There was one, I got a nasty review. I got a 1-star review on this podcast, and someone wrote, it was a guy. It's always a guy. The women are never nasty. And he's like, does this guy even know anything? Like, how is he a CMO? He asks the most basic questions to CMOs. And I'm like, I don't know everything, you moron. And then also B, like, I'm trying to ask the questions that someone is listening to in their headphones and they want to know. So I didn't know that. Now I ask the question. So let me get that off my chest.
there you go. There you go.
So okay, because I was just looking at like Google Search Console for like Exit 5 as an example. We basically have entirely branded search right now because we haven't done anything with SEO yet. And I can see month over month, quarter over quarter, the volume in searches of people literally going to Google and searching for Exit 5. I love that as an indicator. It's very simple.
That to me, that's it is a leading indicator of brand awareness because, but to me, it's just very logical. It says that people know your company name. And if they know your company name, it must be because you've put it out there in an effective way to be more top of mind. So you would expect that to grow over time.
And do you do anything like benchmarking your like share of voice versus competitors? Are there ways that you do that?
Yeah. So like you, I don't know everything. So this isn't my specific area.
Whoa. Hold on. We're going to get another 1-star review now. I have a guest who is admitting she doesn't know everything.
I'm a dum-dum in many domains, but what I'm good at is hiring people that are really, really smart in their area of expertise. So on the social front, we do benchmark against a universe of competitors. Now, share of voice, though, is tricky because sometimes it's for bad reasons that you've had more coverage over a certain time horizon. So, LivePerson has, like a lot of other brands, had bad press from time to time. You'll see your share of voice skyrocket. So you have to take that measure to some extent with a grain of salt. I also like social following as a measure of brand awareness. If somebody's inclined to follow you as a brand, it's because they're aware of you. Now, it could be because they want to get a job at your company, but that's okay. Employer brand also contributes to brand awareness. So none of these metrics on the brand front are perfect. But I do think it's important that we measure because, it costs a lot to invest in brand, and you want to have some indication that those investments are paying off.
Okay, last question. If you had one wish as a CMO and you could solve any one marketing problem that you've seen in your career, could snap your fingers and solve it, what would it be?
I love this question, Dave. So
thank you. I write my own questions here on the Exit 5 podcast. That's very kind of you.
I like this one. So, and I'd love it even more if you could make it come true, this wish. So my wish would be that folks treat marketing with the respect that it deserves as experts in their domain. I think that because everyone can read and write, they have this idea that they all know how to market. And nobody presumes this with finance or with engineering or with so many other functions across the business. But in marketing, everybody has an opinion and everybody weighs in with that opinion. And often, as a marketing team, you run the risk of becoming order takers to everybody's kind of whim around what they think will work with marketing. And I just think crowdsourcing a marketing strategy from across the business is a losing proposition. And we should always be open to feedback, but it's a slippery slope. And I do think that instinct exists that people just believe that they know how to market because they're human beings. And I just don't think that's true. And it's hard to market effectively. And I wish that if I could snap my fingers and everybody would suddenly realize that and treat us accordingly, that would make things a lot easier.
Just going to let that breathe for a second.
Catharsis, right?
It is. I've said the exact same thing so many times and used the exact same analogies. Like, because everybody writes and communicates, like, my least favorite thing in the world is like, let's pull up the website and let's let our 5 VPs give feedback on the website. Oh, great.
Yeah. Agreed.
It's like, so I help my aunt like sells pottery and I help her with her Shopify store. And so I'm qualified to give you opinions on the website.
Exactly. infuriating.
All right, Ruth, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming. I got a ton of notes in here. This will be a great episode. You're going to get a bunch of LinkedIn messages after this. So go find Ruth Zive on LinkedIn. Send her a message. Just tell her you like this episode. If you thought I asked too basic questions, leave me another 1-star review. I need more of them. They fuel me. Thank you, Ruth. Great to meet you. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for coming on this episode of the Exit
Thank
5
you.
podcast.
This was a pleasure.
Exit 5.